So good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining the weekly AJA Zoom event, and welcome to any new people. We also have others watching on the Facebook live stream at the moment, and people will be listening to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio, at FM 88 in Melbourne, or at j-air.com.au. Welcome, everyone. My name's David Adler. I'm president of AJA, and today technical panel operator and everything else. Also on the screens are our guests, Colonel Richard Kemp, and who's in New York, I think, and Hugh Kitson in the UK. The format tonight is that we have a special event which we are going to hear about a very important project that Richard Kemp and Hugh Kitson are involved in, very important for our community. We will be asking for your support for this project in a tangible way. If you have any questions, best put up your hand today by using the reaction icon. There'll be a limited capacity to look for any written questions because of the reduced number of people. So Hugh Kitson and Richard Kemp, we're going to be discussing extreme anti-Zionism, which is widely recognised to be the new form of anti-Semitism. The former Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks put very eloquently how the target of anti-Semitism shifts. It's been our religion, it's been our culture, it's been our race, and now it seems to be the Jewish state, which is the primary target. AJA Tzedakah, which is our charitable arm, is registered to fight anti-Semitism, so we're able to use that vehicle to support the project. Hugh Kitson and Colonel Kemp need not a lot of introduction. Hugh is a very accomplished film director with numerous awards. Richard Kemp has been a guest with us before. He's a former British commander with a lot of experience in the Middle East, and he's stood up for Israel in all sorts of forums, including arguably the most toxic, which is the United Nations. So let's get into it. And first question's for you, Hugh. Can you tell us a little bit about what the project is and how it's structured?
Right. Well, Whose Land is a documentary series that looks at the legitimacy of Israel in international law. And we released the first part of it in time for the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. And we have been working on the second, and even a third part is underway as well. But the second part specifically looks at the right of sovereignty, the legal right of sovereignty in international law for Israel's sovereignty over the whole of Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria. And there is much lawfare going on. The United Nations I would describe as a kangaroo court. They pass all these resolutions without actually examining the principles of international law. And this is one of the things that the second part is all about. It's like building a court case, if you like, for Israel's right to sovereignty over the whole of Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem. And the lawfare that is waged against Israel with these UN resolutions, with the media especially, is straight out anti-Zionism.
Yep. And
it's something that needs to be fought. So what we're trying to do with Whose Land is to educate people as to what international law actually does say.
Okay. And Richard, I'm sure you're familiar with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has a number of working examples, some of which relate to Israel. any of your commentary address the issues in the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, first of all, before I answer that, David, can I just say what a pleasure it is to join you today, both for two reasons. Firstly, because I consider myself to be part Australian. My mother was half Australian, so I take my lineage from her partly, as all good Jews do, even though I'm not a good Jew or even a Jew.
We'll gladly claim you, Richard.
We hail from Rockhampton, if you've heard of that. And and secondly, because I have the most immense admiration for AJA. It's one of the, I think, one of the most fearless and staunch pro-Israel, pro-Jewish organizations in the world that I've dealt with. So it's a pleasure to be with you. In relation to IHRA, yeah, we had I think a really good example of how IHRA, how valuable it is, and how it's been breached recently. First of all, here in the US, where I'm in New York for my sins. Wish I was in Sydney or Melbourne, or even Rockhampton. And the United States have recently, in their anti-Semitism task force, they've recently taken on organizations like CARE and other Islamic bodies to join their task force. And they're sort of, while the US recognizes IHRA as being the kind of primary definer of anti-Semitism, from that definition, they have decided, as a result of this organization, this committee they've formed, that the IHRA definition will not be the sole definition of anti-Semitism, and they have effectively they've incorporated other weaker definitions as well. And this is as a result of enormous pressure on the administration here by anti-Israel groups, which just goes to show how important the IHRA is. And they tend to get bent out of shape by it, which is a good thing, because it occupies them, it ties them up, and it sort of drags them onto our territory as well. So I think that's one issue. The other thing, we had a very good example recently. I don't know if you've been following it over there, but in Berlin, there's a horrific so-called rock star, ancient man called Roger Waters, who's a Brit, used to have a band called Pink Floyd. And his recent concert, in which he dressed up in very similar regalia to the SS, to Nazi regalia, in Berlin in 2013. Sorry, 23. I'm behind the times. He not only was he there with a Schmeiser machine gun, with his SS regalia, with stooges on stage with him, with Nazi helmets and brown shirts, but also he had the temerity to compare Anne Frank, one of the most high-profile victims of the Holocaust, with Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera journalist who was tragically killed in Jenin a few months ago. And the clear inference or implication of Waters there was that that in the same way as the Nazis killed Anne Frank, Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by the Nazi state of Israel. And that was very clear. And that is in distinct breach of the IHRA definition. It clearly lies. I mean, Shireen Abu Akleh, just there's many reasons to dispute this, but one of them is that no one knows who killed her. She may have been killed by IDF bullets. She may have been killed by Palestinian terrorist bullets. Whichever way it was, if it had been IDF, it was certainly by accident. There was no deliberate intention to kill any journalist by the IDF in Jenin. So I think those two things just illustrate, first, in my view, the benefit of the IHRA definition and the need to stand by it and support it.
Yeah. Well, of course, a number of the working working examples of the IHRA relate to Israel and content that you guys are addressing. Now, I was asked to show a video clip. In fact, I'm going to show two, one at this stage from the work that's being done.
تم تسميتها تم الربيع وعند احتمال يقع كانت يافا هون فصارت كالربية.
هاي أرض الميعاد. هم بفكروا اليهود إنها ميعاد إلهم، لكن هي ميعاد لتجميعهم للقضاء عليهم بأمر رب العباد.
لقد بنيت خطتي على نار الحقد والكراهية التي تملأ قلوب اليهود نحو محمد وأتباعه.
على ضياع هيبتنا بسبب محمد.
Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's architect of the campaign to brand the Jewish people as a subhuman race in Nazi Germany, was quoted as saying, "If a lie is repeated often enough, then the people will believe it." A similar tactic is being used today in the propaganda war waged against Israel by Islam and the pro-Palestinian factions in the Middle East.
لكن نحن في مدارسنا نعلم ما يمليه علينا ديننا وضميرنا، لأن القدس عربية وأن فلسطين من شمالها لجنوبها من نهرها لبحرها هي عربية فلسطينية إسلامية، وستبقى كذلك رغم أنف هذا المحتل لها.
At the heart of the propaganda war against Israel is the use of fake history and lawfare, the revision and deliberate misrepresentation of international law. Whose Land is a documentary film looking at the legitimacy of Israel in international law. Join me, Richard Kemp, in the two-part documentary film Whose Land, as we uncover the true story behind the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, that's the trailer. We do have access to a little bit more material, and I'll show another clip in a little while. Richard, you're well known for some of the advocacy you've done, including at the UN, at the Human Rights Council. What's it like going into that forum and standing up for Israel?
I've spoken at emergency debates in the Human Rights Council on about 5 occasions, all of which in relation to conflicts in Gaza, by which I mean deliberate Palestinian-Arab aggression against Israel launched from Gaza. And to me, it's actually a pleasure to do it. To some people, that might sound a bit perverse, because essentially you go there and generally speaking, people like me, there's a few NGOs that speak at the end after most of the countries have spoken. And you sit through either 1 or 2 days of diatribes by pretty much every country in the world against Israel, condemning Israel. And listening to it is actually quite sickening. And there are 2 countries, I think, that can be relied upon usually to stand up for Israel in the face of all this abuse. And one is the United States of America, and the other is Australia. And it's very rare that those 2 countries are not staunch in their support of Israel. And it's a pleasure to listen to that. But the reason I say it's actually quite good to be there is because when I've made speeches there, they clearly have antagonized some of these other people who don't want to know the truth. They don't know the truth in many cases. They just want to lie about it. And just as an example, the last time I was there, which was autumn last year, I think there were something like 150 speeches. Of all the speeches, I was the only one that was interrupted. And I was interrupted by the Palestinian Authority ambassador, who said that I was spreading hate, I was causing conflict, my words would lead to further aggression and further violence. And when I hear that sort of thing, I'm very pleased, because I know that I'm getting under his skin. But I just want to finish off by sharing an anecdote which I think many people will find absolutely extraordinary and shows the real depth to which the UN sink. And that is that this same event, as I was talking about, of all the countries spewing out anti-Semitic hate and accusing Israel of breaches of human rights and aggression, China was one of them. China We know all about China. But even more bizarre in a way, the Russian Federation was there. The Russian Federation has been suspended from the UN Human Rights Council, but they were still there and they still spoke. It's quite extraordinary. It shows the kind of fantasy world they live in. And the words of the ambassador of the Russian Federation were something like this. He said, the Russian Federation utterly condemns the unlawful aggression of the state of Israel. It condemns the war of aggression that Israel is mounting against the Palestinians. It calls on Israel to observe international human rights and the laws of war, etc., etc., etc. And this is while Russia's waging war on Ukraine. It was quite bizarre. And you really can't take the UN Human Rights Council seriously. But on the other hand, you have to, because it does such enormous damage. Because, I've been to universities here in the US, in the UK, in Australia, and other countries around the world. And what comes out of the UN is quoted as being authoritative. And by many people, even those who are not kind of rabidly anti-Israel, that they believe it. And they think this reinforces the message of the anti-Israelis.
Yeah, well, Hugh, that opens for you, because really what you're trying to do, as far as I can tell in the videos that you're producing, is to provide, amongst other things, the tools which will help those that support Israel or are interested in the truth. You don't have to be a rabid supporter, but at least interested in the truth. So can you elaborate on, or just mention a couple of the elements of what's coming up, what you're working on, which will help people who want to spread the truth do so?
Well, yes, I think this Whose Land is going to be a very valuable educational tool, because, as Richard just said, not many people know the truth as such. And it's not as if we're trying to justify Israel's existence. We're simply trying to tell the truth. And Israel is accused. In fact, going back to the UN and Resolution 2334, it basically said that any Jewish presence in Judea, Samaria, or Jerusalem is a gross violation of international law.
Can I just put in there, that's the one that was facilitated by Barack Obama just before he left the presidential office. That's
right. Well, that is actually a blatant lie. And there is no such thing in international law as occupied Palestinian territory. There has been no binding agreement with the Palestinians that transfers any of the territory to their jurisdiction or control. Well, when I say, sorry, I shouldn't say control, because actually Oslo does give sections of Judea and Samaria to their control, but not sovereignty. One of the things we expose, for instance, and the two clips went up with the email that went out earlier today, is we expose the illegality of the Arab invasion and also Britain's complicity in it. Now, there is a principle of international law, for instance, known as ex injuria non oritur, which basically means that illegal acts do not create law. And what these two clips, which are on the email this morning, that was sent out this morning, show is that invasion was illegal, and Jordan's subsequent annexation of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem is also illegal. So they cannot, as a result of an illegal invasion, claim sovereignty. Now, for instance, what Jordan did in 1988, she ceded her claimed sovereignty to Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem to the PLO. Well, in reality, what was happening there was Jordan was handing over stolen property. And this is one of the things that we need to expose. And if I may say so, I think it's very important that the Jewish communities worldwide, and sadly, the Jewish communities are quite divided about Israel and Israel's right to sovereignty over her historic homeland in Judea and Samaria. I believe, first and foremost, the Jewish community needs to be, and I speak as a Gentile, so forgive me for that, needs to be educated in this so that you can stand up on Israel's behalf, because international law is really being turned on its head.
Hugh, you're spot on, and we can't expect our governments to have greater clarity or to be in a better position than the Jewish community. They're not going to march ahead of us. We have to march ahead of them and try to pull them along. And as you say, that's a major problem. Richard, I want to ask you about the media, and I know you do a lot of work in the media. In most countries, certainly democratic countries, Hamas and Islamic Jihad prescribed terrorist organisations. They're also vehemently anti-Semitic. They've had charters that call for the extermination of Jews. They're, teaching their children hatred and that they have to go out and kill Jews. And there are chants and through the music, etc. The media seems to ignore all this. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a really troubling phenomenon. If you just take the BBC in the UK, which is the most powerful media organisation in the UK, the most influential by far, and actually one of the most influential media organisations anywhere in the world. And I think they lead the way on this in many ways, and they give respectability, I think, to some other media organizations around the world who take the same line as they do. And for those of you who don't know, just to remind you, or those of you who are aware, I'll remind you that the BBC was categorized by the Simon Wiesenthal Centre as being the second most anti-Semitic organization in the world. The
Wow.
BBC, paid for by British taxpayers and supposedly an independent, objective media organization. The only entity that was categorized by the Simon Wiesenthal Centre above the BBC was the Islamic Republic of Iran. That was the only one. So that I think indicates the level of anti-Semitism. And it's really, their definition was, going back to the IHRA thing, that the way of defining it was not partly the BBC's attitude to Jews, which is always to basically to undermine them. And when there's some conflict in the UK, for example, between Jews and Muslims, which sometimes is initiated invariably by Muslims, the BBC normally cast doubt on the Jews' view and support the Muslims' view. But most of it is anti-Israel stuff, which, as we know, being anti-Israel by definition is anti-Semitism as well. That's obviously disputed, but it's true. So, but a lot of it, I would put a lot of it down to not all of it, but a lot of it I put down to the kind of hard left post-colonial guilt that exists in our country, certainly in the UK, strongly, and they feel they have to condemn what they consider, obviously wrongly, to be a colonialist enterprise, i.e. Israel, and they have to support those poor Palestinian people who are struggling against this illegal occupation and oppression, which, as Hugh's already explained, does not exist. And what they neglect, of course, is that for the same reason, is that Islamic Jihad, which fired all these rockets quite recently, and Hamas, they're not poor little groups of Palestinians supporting an oppressed Palestinian people. They are proxies of Iran, one of the more powerful states in the Middle East, about to be nuclear armed unless someone does something about it. And it's Iran that funds them, and Iran that supplies their weapons, in the same way as Iran supplies drones to attack civilian populations in Ukraine on an almost daily basis. And so that sort of is skated over, it's ignored. And it all comes down, I think, predominantly to this anti-Semitism driven by colonial guilt. It's also driven by, I think, in Europe anyway, countries kind of resent and reject the idea of nationalism. And Israel is, still, it has its many problems, but is still a very strong nationalist state that supports the kind of, to a large extent supports Western values, Western civilization, and the idea of a nationalist entity. And that is something that many left-wing media organizations of the world really reject. And I would say one final thing, which is that one of the best media organizations, we have a very good station in the UK called GB News, which I think is worth watching, quite new, but one of the most staunchly fair and I think honest media organizations is Sky News Australia. Maybe not every part of them, but certainly for programs like Outsiders, which sometimes I have the pleasure of taking part in. These are the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, quite right. Look, there's a lot of other questions I've got here, but I'm going to skip that because I can see we've got a queue up of questions. There is one other video clip that I'm going to show, and this perhaps explains the work a little more. It's one of the components that we sent out in the email this morning, but I'm just going to play the first 2 minutes. Hopefully that'll...
On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly resolved that British-mandated Palestine should be partitioned into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted UN Resolution 181 and the Arabs rejected it. The surrounding Arab countries, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan and Egypt, swore that they would invade and destroy an independent Jewish state as soon as it was declared. The British government had assessed that if attacked by its neighbours, the Jewish state would probably last no more than 3 weeks. Instead of helping the Jewish community of Palestine to defend itself, Britain had imposed an arms embargo on the Jewish fighting forces, while at the same time arming and training the armies of Egypt and Jordan. On the 14th of May, 1948, Britain withdrew its forces from Palestine, thus ending its administration as a mandatory power. Later that same day, David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of the State of Israel in this very hall in Tel Aviv.
You are listening to the voice of David Ben-Gurion, proclaiming the independence of the State of Israel. By virtue of the natural and historic right of the Jewish people and of the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, we hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine to be called Medinat Yisrael, the State of Israel.
Within minutes of the conclusion of the declaration, Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, formally recognized Israel's statehood. The following day, the newly established Jewish state was fighting for its life.
The Jordanian invasion of Israel, the newly declared State of Israel, happened on May 15th, 1948. It was Jordan was one of a number of states that invaded Israel on that day, along with Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. And the invasion was quite explicitly for the purpose of making sure that the State of Israel would not survive. It was done without any authorization of the Security Council. It was done without any pretense of self-defense. It was simply an invasion of aggression in order to destroy a newly born state. Now, obviously, that's illegal. It was done with the approval of the British.
Yeah, well, it goes on. I just wanted to give that as a sort of a sample that shows the quality of the production and what we hope we can support. Now, we have our 1 minute promo at this point before we go into questions. Hopefully I'll find there it is. Okay, so at the end of the event, normally I ask everyone to go to the AJA website, jewishassociation.org.au, to take out membership if you're not yet a member, perhaps to make a donation. Make sure you're following us on Facebook. But today, a little different. Because we are involving AJA Tzedakah and wanting to develop these tools that are necessary to help us combat anti-Semitism, we would like everyone who's listening, please, to consider making a donation. And I have up there the two most popular mechanisms. If you would like to do it by EFT, the BSB and account number are written there. The BSB is 062236. The account number is 103233913. Or you can do it via the website using a credit card. You go to jewishassociation.org.au/donation. Now, one of our donors has sent a message, which is that Israel's legal rights to sovereignty over Jerusalem and the whole of Judea and Samaria are constantly lied about in the UN and the media, whose land reveals the truth of what international law really says. Without the funding needed to complete this vital project, none of us will know the truth. Well, few might, but we won't have the tools to spread it. I've deleted the person's name. If you feel free to, as a substantial donor yourself, the person who sent the message, I think you're in a position to encourage other AJA members to join you in getting behind this project. God bless you, my friend. So again, there are the mechanisms, and please note it down, and please do something to support the project. We're now going to go to questions. Can I remind you, please, to keep the questions brief, not to make speeches or statements, and hopefully if we have quick, brief questions and brief answers from our guests, we'll be able to get through many of them. Anne, you're first up if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Now, Hugh and Richard, you are very, very serious people. However, I'm going to raise another issue here. We live in the world of social media, and we have celebrities, rock stars, musicians who are, for whatever want of the word, influencers. How are people like you going to seep through that sort of world?
Well, first of all, everything on social media is just sound bites. What I'm trying to do, and Richard's trying to do with the Whose Land project, is actually to educate people so that you can respond to the social media accusations against Israel. You can't educate someone in 2 minutes. It takes time, and because so many lies have been propagated through social media, through the media, which Richard has talked about, we need to actually educate people and tell the truth, because unless one has a proper understanding of the issues, it's very difficult to counteract this.
Yeah, I would agree entirely with you, and I think it's so important. I'm pretty active on social media myself, but I recognise that I'm not kind of Roger Waters or one of the haters who has much more traction against Israel. But though, you know, the young people I think are our primary targets, and young people are educated by old people like me, and even older people like Hugh, much older people like Hugh,
Yes.
and young ladies like I've forgotten your name, apologies, who asked the question. But if you know, one of the key things is And this is where the Jewish community is so important for reasons that that David mentioned earlier, which is that, you know, our governments and our international entities are not going to go ahead of the Jewish community in their support of Israel at all. So it's so important the Jewish communities in our countries are educated, and I think Whose Land is a phenomenal tool for that. And I've been over here speaking to a group in the US, very effective group that does its best to prepare Jewish high school students to protect themselves and also to support the state of Israel when they get to university. And you know what a cesspit that many universities are these days of anti-Israel hatred. And they use, for example, Whose Land to educate their teens. And one of the beauties of Hugh's project is that it's not only just a sort of an hour-and-a-half long documentary, he's also divided up into, you know, sound bites for people who don't have the attention span to sit and watch something for an hour and a half. So I think that's the key thing, to educate people who can then in turn use social media to try and counter the onslaught on social media.
Peter Bone.
Gentlemen, pleasure to be listening to both of you, Colonel Kemp and Hugh. This question is really directed for Hugh for the Whose Land project, something that I came across not too long ago, but I'm sure that many of the people who have zoomed into this meeting would not be aware about. And Hugh, I'm just going to ask you this. In the documentary Whose Land, have you made reference to the 2013 ruling by the Third Chamber of the Court of Appeal of Versailles? I know that's quite long-winded and quite technical and perhaps boring for many of you, but as far as I know, this was the last European court ruling on the rights of the legal rights of Israel to the areas that we called Judea and Samaria, and they conclude that the Palestinians have no right in the international legal sense to the region, unlike Israel, who is legitimately entitled to all land beyond the 1949 ceasefire lines. And I think that that court ruling, the last European court ruling about Israel's legal rights to the area, is so important to get over. And never, whether it's on, the lady before asked about social media or on any information on Facebook or when anyone is interviewed, is that ruling ever brought forward to recognise Israel's legal rights to the area? We all know about, well, sorry, we all know,
Peter,
you know
I think
about the
you've
San
got
Remo agreement.
Yeah, I think you've got your question in. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The answer to your question is no. And the reason why we did not cover this, and I totally agree with what the court has to say, but I took advice from one of our international lawyers who are in the film, Dr. Jacques Gauthier, actually, who is French-Canadian by origin. And he said that very often district courts cannot create a legal precedent. And he felt actually it may be counterproductive to include this particular thing. Now, what we have done in part 2, one of the episodes that's coming up, is to look at the 2004 International Court of Justice ruling. And our team of lawyers, we've actually interviewed a dozen lawyers altogether, top lawyers. Jacques Gauthier is just one of them. We've got Eugene Kontorovich, R.V. Bell, Alan Baker, Andrew Tucker, to just name a few of them. What they have done is to pull this ruling apart by really looking at how the court misdirected itself. But I'm afraid we, on Jacques Gauthier's advice, I didn't look at that Versailles ruling because, and he understands the French court system, it could not actually create a legal precedent as such.
Okay. Next question is from surname Cohen. You can unmute and ask.
All right, thank you very much to both of you. Look, I'd like on this project of Whose Land, there's one area that I think has been missed out a fair bit, and that is in all the discussions on the Balfour Declaration, it was the Jews, the Israelis, and they were talking with the opposition. And it was the Arabs who said, you will only talk to the Arab League. And Hussein was the representative of the Arab League. He wasn't a Palestinian. He was in the Transjordan area. And not only that.
Can you ask the question?
I'm just saying, why don't you include that factor that the Arab League refuted the fact that there was such an entity as a Palestinian people. They were just Arabs who'd wandered there. And that, I think, is a powerful argument because that's what the world decision was made on. And they agreed it.
Right, we haven't covered that yet as such, and it won't be in part 2, but it'll certainly be included in part 3 as we examine the so-called origins of the Palestinian entity as it exists today. And Peter Baum, who was asked a question just now, is an expert on this. And Peter, I hope that you'll give us an interview at some point further down the line on this. But it's something that we certainly intend to cover.
Yeah, I'm just seeing some things in the text that Whose Land is on YouTube. The previous versions of Whose Land is indeed on YouTube, but what we're talking about now is making additional modules, and you've seen a couple of little clips from that. Now, they're not on YouTube, they don't exist yet, they're in the production stage. Dennis Max. You can. Yeah,
thank you very much for the work you're doing. I congratulate you. Sitting here in Australia, all I can see is SBS, ABC, the Greens, the ALP, or the left wing of the ALP, all having very negative publicity about Israel, about the existence of Israel, about the right of Israel to exist, and using that as a whipping boy for to create anti-Semitism as well. How are you going to get your work published, distributed, aired, and it's all very well to do the work. How are you going to, just the two of you, going to ensure that this is exposed and becomes known by a large proportion of the population?
Hugh can probably answer that more comprehensively, but can I just say that there are two main things we need. One is the support, particularly of Jewish organizations like the AGA and other people with large memberships across the world, really, to publicize, to distribute, to support, and to do their best to get the work we're doing publicly known. The second thing, I'm sorry to say this, but the second thing that we need, I think above all, is money. Because of course it takes a lot of money to produce a high quality production such as Hugh has been doing. And it takes a lot more money to actually get it distributed. So it's one thing to produce it, it's another thing entirely, as you rightly say, to get it distributed and to make it have an impact. And that does require money. So please, if you're in a position to do so, please cough up, Hugh.
Totally agree with that. But this is not something that we can do alone. I think it's something, if the Jewish community and also the Christian community can get behind getting it out, then that's certainly helped. Now, organizations, for instance, like UK Lawyers for Israel, and we've interviewed one of their people, a lady called Natasha Hausdorff, who's a young, upcoming and brilliant lawyer. UK Lawyers for Israel have got all the episodes, except maybe the last one, on their website. Another organization, the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, THINK, which is based in The Hague, have also got it on their website. So it's a team effort to get it out there, and I believe this is an area where the Jewish community can certainly help. Show it in your synagogues, and just talk about it too. It has the potential to go viral, and I hope it does, but we can't do it by ourselves.
I want to add that HAA has been an interesting phenomenon, and I use the word phenomenon appropriately. It is now by far the largest Jewish pro-Israel platform in the country. Some of our items on social media go well into six figures, and we had a particular week where we did this, where the reach exceeded 1 million in a week. Now, that was a new record for us. It's unusual, but we will do the best we can with each and every of them, the modules that Richard and Hugh are producing. Okay, Joseph Goldblum.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
We can
Is
hear
that working?
Yeah.
Great. Just as a matter of interest, Elon Musk has recently declared himself to be a pro-Semite on an interview. However, that's not my question. My question relates to the anti-Semitism. There appear to be two types of anti-Semitism: political and community/personal. The political anti-Semitism can be countered by films such as being proposed here, and I heartily support that. But how do you counter the societal and personal hatred, which is anti-Semitism?
Well, there are campaigns going like End Jew Hatred, which was started up by the Lawfare Project, and it is a really difficult one, because and it's related to the political anti-Semitism, and the two really are linked. You get very negative media coverage, for instance, when there is a conflict, for instance, in Gaza, and that does in itself create safety issues for the Jewish communities in Australia, and certainly we saw that in Britain a couple of years ago, and that's important. But countering anti-Semitism on a personal basis, all we can do, and as a Christian myself, I stand with the Jewish people, and it's a difficult one. But there are organisations that are doing it, like the Lawfare Project, which is run by Brooke Goldstein and others that have joined Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and so on.
Yeah, I think I'd just add briefly to that things like, Hugh mentioned the name End Jew Hatred. It's an organization that is obviously very worthy, but it's actually unrealistic to say end Jew hatred, because you're never going to end Jew hatred. You're never going to end war. You're never going to end crime, have a world of peace and tranquility. It's never going to happen. This is human beings we're talking about. And anti-Semitism is a sickness that exists in the human race and has done probably since the human race came into being, or since the Jews came into being, shall we say. And it's not going to end, but it does have to be countered, and it has to be fought at every possible step. And I think, you know, in the same way as the Whose Land project does undermine, or, you know, assuming it gets the traction it needs, does undermine the political anti-Semitism, but it also undermines and can undermine the social anti-Semitism. They're both linked. And I do think that movements or so I say developments like the Abraham Accords, and let's hope that does develop further, the willingness of major Arab or Islamic governments around the world to actually be on the side of Israel, to have good relations with Israel, and to be seen to benefit from Israel, that influence, there's no question about the influence that that kind of movement has on ordinary people's views of Israel and the Jews.
We're going to try to get through two final questions. Joe, can you ask your question, please?
Yes, I'll be very quick. Richard and Hugh, could you please confirm, or otherwise, that the British mandate was a trust? They were the trustee over the land, and therefore Jewish people were the beneficiaries, and the trust has been breached, and perhaps if we can get some money for your funding, that's what it could be looked at. Thank you.
Whose Land Part 1 deals with all of that. And yes, if you've not seen Whose Land Part 1, you can go to our website, whoseland.tv, and you can watch either an hour and a half, or you can watch the 10-minute episodes that are up on our website, and UK Lawyers for Israel, and also Think. So all of that information is there. Part 1 looks at the legal and historic foundation of the modern state of Israel, and it goes up to 1948. So all of that is covered in Part 1.
Okay. And Dina, you get the honour of the last question.
Thank you both for your excellent and crucial work. Could I ask, how many modules have you completed and how many more do you envisage?
Right. Part 1 contains 10 episodes. We have completed the first 2 episodes of Part 2, and links to that are on the email that AJA sent out this morning. And we have another 7 episodes of Part 2 to complete. And then beyond that, we're going to be looking at another part, which we've done quite a bit of work on, actually. And it's looking at the origins of the PLO. The Palestinian entity, as we know it today, is an invented people. So that's part of it. We're going to look at the hatred against Israel in the UN Human Rights Council, in the UN generally, and we're actually really going to try and educate the public on this. It may not be generally known, but the UN is not a legislative body. It has no power to create law as such. And when you get something like Resolution 2334, it's done by a vote. It expresses the will of the majority of nations. It's not a legally binding body, what they say, unless it's a Chapter 7 resolution. And I don't believe there has ever been a Chapter 7 resolution against Israel to date, but I could be corrected on that.
Okay.
I don't need to add anything to Hugh's answer, but I think as we're about to end, I would really like to give you my immense thanks, or our thanks perhaps,
yes,
for giving us the time, giving us the AJA, giving us such tremendous support. And thank you to all for listening. And I hope you'll be in a position to not only watch the film as it comes out, but also to support us. And I have huge admiration for what the AJA does, as I mentioned before.
As I do as well.
It's our privilege to be able to be associated with people of the quality of Richard Kemp and Hugh Kitson. And in closing, let me just remind you again, you should see on your screens now both the bank account and the website in order to make a donation. I've also put the bank account in the chat. We are approaching the end of the financial year, and any contributions to AJA Tzedakah are tax deductible. We have all the approvals established, and we're happy to make the vehicle available to assist this project, and any donations received until the 4th of June will be dedicated to the Whose Land project. And just finally, there's a request that's come in that I should ask everyone here to help build these sort of events. And next week, we have a very special event with an outstanding person I'm really looking forward to having as our guest. We are looking at the subject of women's rights from Tehran to Melbourne with Senator Claire Chandler. She is really one of the bright stars in the Senate. She's been outspoken on some of the crazy radical gender theories and such. Robert and I had a very, very positive meeting with her in Parliament, and I think she's a solid ally for the sort of values that we believe in. So here's the request also, that you tell a friend or family member, and make sure that in addition to yourself, you have brought someone else along to sample the sort of work that we do. So thank you again to Hugh Kitson and Richard Kemp for the great work they're doing. And a reminder that, as always, that the L'Chaim program with Maurice Klein is on now, 3ZZZ in Melbourne, FM 92.3, or on the internet, 3ZZZ.com.au. That's all for this evening, and thank you, everyone, and thank you particularly to those that are going to make a contribution.
Thank you very much indeed.